People will say in Jamaica that they have never heard that hard work has killed anyone. Well, today, I will reveal that hard work did kill many of our ancestors. Let me say welcome, everyone. Today, we're taking a powerful journey into the past to understand the daily life of field slaves in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. Please remember to subscribe. It takes a lot to develop content. I spend hours researching these areas to ensure I can share with you. This story is not easy to hear, but it's one we must tell because it shaped the Caribbean and it echoes into the world we live in today. Imagine this. It's the 1700s or early 1800s. You're on a plantation in Jamaica. Sugar is king. And behind the sweet taste of sugar lies the sweat and suffering of thousands of enslaved Africans. The plantation system was built on profit. It needed land, labor, and lots of it. Indigenous people were the first to be enslaved, but many died from disease and violence. The story about the people who came before the invaders will be addressed in another segment. After killing off most of these people, they started the transatlantic slave trade, which brought millions of Africans to the Caribbean, torn from their homes, their families, and their futures. Before Jamaica was called Jamaica, it was known as Zaimaca, land of wood and water, by the island's first people, the Arawak and Taino. They lived in peace until 1494, when Christopher Columbus arrived. That moment changed everything. Spanish colonizers enslaved the indigenous people. Disease and brutal labor wiped most of them out by the early 1600s. But not all vanished. Things got worse. Sugar plantations exploded across the island. To meet labor demands, England turned to the transatlantic slave trade, forcing millions of Africans into slavery. By 1800, over 300,000 enslaved people lived in Jamaica, cut off from their homelands and families. Why Africans? Europeans claimed they were better suited to the heat and cheaper than white servants. But the truth is, it was about profit, not people. This violent system didn't just build plantations. Let us go further. Sugar wasn't just a sweet treat, it was the backbone of the Caribbean economy, especially in Jamaica. In the 1600s, sugar cane replaced crops like cotton and tobacco because it brought in more money. Soon, entire islands were covered with cane fields. By the 1700s, sugar dominated everything. In fact, up to 90% of the sugar consumed in Europe came from the Caribbean. But this came at a terrible cost. Growing sugar was brutal. It required endless labor, and that demand fueled the mass importation of enslaved Africans. Plantations were like factories, built to squeeze out profit with no regard for human life. But sugar also brought problems. Focusing on just one crop made the economy fragile. If sugar prices dropped, entire islands suffered. And clearing forests for sugar destroyed wildlife and natural habitats. Food was often ignored in favor of profit, leaving enslaved people hungry and dependent on imports. The worst part? Plantation owners treated enslaved people as disposable. They believed it was cheaper to replace them than to keep them healthy. High death rates weren't accidents. They were part of the system. This was not just farming. It was exploitation on an industrial scale with devastating effects on people, the economy, and the environment. For field slaves in Jamaica and the Caribbean, the day began before sunrise and ended at dusk. There were no real breaks, just long hours of backbreaking work under the hot sun. Plantation labor was organized into gangs based on age and strength. Men, women, even children and elders were assigned roles. In 1755, a British manual explained how to manage these gangs, including a note that the youngest children should be watched by an older woman with gentleness. But don't be fooled. This wasn't about kindness, it was about protecting future workers. Even children were seen as future profit. Slaves worked 6 days a week, and Sundays were meant to be a rest day. But during harvest season, even that was taken away. Sugarcane had to be cut and processed fast, or it would rot. Food breaks were short, maybe a quick bite in the morning and again at noon, just enough to keep going. Then it was back to work until the sun went down. This was life on the plantation, long hours, little rest, and every action calculated for profit. Every moment of the day was controlled, and every body was used, young or old, strong or weak, in service of a system built on suffering. Working in the fields wasn't just hard, it was brutal. Under the scorching Caribbean sun, sometimes reaching 38 degrees or 100 degrees, enslaved people worked from dawn until dark and often longer during harvest season. The sugar plantation ran like a factory. Slaves were split into gangs by strength. The strongest men and women, called the first gang, did the hardest tasks, digging holes, planting cane, and cutting it down with heavy machetes. The second gang handled fertilizing and gathering cane. The third gang was made up of children, even toddlers, and the elderly, doing tough but lighter jobs like weeding and carrying food. There was no childhood, no retirement. Everyone was seen as labor. Tools were simple, mostly hoes and curved knives. A single person might dig 60 to 100 holes a day by hand. During planting, a team of 30 enslaved workers could cover 2 acres. Cane was fertilized with heavy baskets of manure, sometimes 80 pounds, balanced on workers' heads. During harvest, work didn't stop. Shifts could stretch to 18 or even 24 hours. This wasn't farming, it was a machine fueled by human suffering. People were treated like parts, replaceable, overworked, and denied basic dignity, all for the profits of the sugar trade. Harvest season on a sugar plantation was a race against time. Once cane was cut, it had to be processed quickly, or it would spoil. That meant the sugar mills never stopped. Enslaved people worked in 2 12-hour shifts, but in reality, many worked 18 hours straight, or even 48 hours without sleep. Inside the mills, they fed cane into massive rollers that crushed it to extract juice. These machines were deadly. If a hand or arm got caught, it could be crushed. Some workers were maimed. Some didn't survive. The danger didn't stop there. The juice was boiled in huge open kettles. The heat was intense, and one wrong move could cause burns or death. Everything was about sugar and profit. The people who kept the system running weren't seen as human, just tools to keep the machinery going. As for rest, there wasn't much. Workers got a short break for breakfast and lunch, just enough time to eat a small ration, maybe cornmeal or yam, and then back to the fields or mills. No safety, no comfort, no choice. The sugar economy demanded everything and gave nothing back but exhaustion and injury. Upon returning to their living quarters after nightfall, often utterly exhausted, enslaved people would often still have chores to do before going to bed. While the specific nature of these chores is not extensively detailed in the provided materials, they likely included preparing food from their provision grounds, tending to their small garden plots, and other domestic tasks essential for their survival and the maintenance of their meager households. The fact that these evening chores, often related to cultivating their own food, were essential for their survival means that even their free time was a continuation of the struggle to sustain themselves within the exploitative system. This pervasive nature of their exploitation meant that virtually every hour of the day was, directly or indirectly, dedicated to their survival or the master's profit. Enslaved people in Jamaica didn't just suffer at work. Their living conditions were harsh by design. Most had to build their own homes using basic materials like sticks, wattle, and palm thatch. These huts were small, overcrowded, and poorly built. Floors were made of dirt. Many slept in hammocks or directly on the ground. Furniture was minimal, maybe a bench or a shared bed. Entire families were crammed into these tight spaces, with barely any room for comfort or privacy. Slave villages were placed near the big house, not for convenience, but for control. Owners wanted constant surveillance. Many of these homes were even built downwind, reinforcing the idea that enslaved people were less valued. But even under these oppressive conditions, signs of resistance and dignity remained. Some cabins had hidden storage pits beneath the floor. Others had padlocks on the doors, small but powerful acts of claiming personal space and privacy. Even when stripped of freedom, people still tried to hold on to a sense of control, a reminder that the human spirit seeks dignity even in the darkest times. On Caribbean plantations, resistance, no matter how small, was met with brutal force. Whippings were common. Runaways faced hanging, mutilation, or worse. The laws didn't protect the enslaved. In fact, judges and lawyers were often slave owners themselves. In Barbados, stealing something worth more than 12 pence could mean death. In Jamaica, striking a white person could lead to execution by fire. Women were especially vulnerable. Rape was used not just as abuse, but as punishment. Some people were forced to wear iron collars or chained to treadmills, whipped as they walked. But control wasn't just physical, it was deeply psychological. Newly arrived Africans were sent to seasoning camps, where they were tortured to break their spirit. Families were torn apart. People from the same tribe were separated to stop communication and unity. Names were taken, cultures were erased, bodies were branded, marked like property. And for those who dared to lead uprisings, their deaths were made public, cruel, and painful, meant to silence hope. This wasn't just slavery of the body, it was a direct attack on identity, community, and the soul. Life expectancy for an enslaved African in the Caribbean? Just 8 years after arrival. On plantations, death was constant, caused by overwork, starvation, brutal treatment, and disease. The system was built for profit, not survival. Infants suffered the most, half died in their first year. In places like Trinidad, out of every 1,000 enslaved babies born, 365 never made it past infancy. Mothers were forced to work almost until childbirth. Babies were weaned early on to poor diets that lacked nutrition. Many died before they could even walk. In Jamaica, the death rate for enslaved people averaged 3% each year. In smaller islands, it was even higher. Enslaved populations couldn't replace themselves naturally, so plantation owners relied on a constant flow of new captives from Africa. Even the journey to the Caribbean, the Middle Passage, was deadly. On average, 12.5% died during the voyage. In earlier centuries, that number could reach 40%. In the end, only 48 out of every 100 Africans captured survived the entire process. What's most chilling? Plantation owners knew this. They admitted it was cheaper to let people die and buy more than to keep them alive. This wasn't neglect, it was strategy. It was economics without humanity, where life was a number and death was part of the business plan. A day in the life of a field slave in Jamaica or the Caribbean was more than hard labor. It was life under constant control. From sunrise to night, enslaved people worked endlessly, digging, cutting, and hauling cane with simple tools, watched by overseers ready to punish. Their homes were overcrowded huts they built themselves. Food was barely enough. Clean water and clothing were scarce, and death, especially for infants, was common. These were not accidents. Plantation owners knew it was cheaper to replace people than keep them healthy, and yet through it all, enslaved people resisted in powerful ways. They grew food on small plots, managed their own water, and guarded what little privacy they had. Their knowledge, especially in medicine, often saved lives, even when European doctors failed. This wasn't just about sugar, it was about profit at the cost of people, land, and legacy. Slavery in the Caribbean left deep scars on the body, on the earth, and on history itself. But it also left stories of survival, strength, and an unbreakable human spirit.